Hello everybody, welcome to part 3 of my Dungeon Lords video series. In this third video, I'm going to show you exactly what the combat phase looks like in Dungeon Lords. Part 1, of course, was a tutorial. Part 2, I showed you what the 4 seasons look like, which shows you preparing for the battle where the adventurers are going to attack your dungeon. Now I'm going to show you exactly what the game looks like when you're trying to defend your dungeon from these adventurers who are just trying to ruin your day. This is a continuation of the second video, so if you want to know exactly how I got these boards set up the way we have them set up right now, watch that video and you'll see exactly which decisions went into deciding exactly how our dungeons were laid out, exactly which kind of traps, what kind of monsters, and everything that went into deciding how these 3 players' dungeon boards exactly look like. So the first thing we need to do is when we start the combat phases, we need to do the preparation or the planning phase, where we need to decide exactly which tunnel or room is being attacked by the adventurers. Then we need to plan which monsters and which traps are going to protect that room. Now remember, the adventurers are lazy. They're going to take the path of least resistance and they're going to go towards whatever corridor or room is closest to the entrance of your dungeon. The entrance, if you forget, is these little stairs that leads right to this very first room. Generally, that means for most players, the very first one they have is going to be a tunnel, unless they've replaced it with a room for some kind of decisions. So first thing we need to do is we need to mark so we know exactly which tile is going to be which room is contested by our adventurers and which room they're going after first. Once we decide where the adventurers are going to attack, we need to decide how we're going to protect either that corridor or we're going to protect that room. Now, like I said, we're going to be protecting corridors for all of our first rounds, so that means we can only use one monster, and that means we can only use one trap for each one of our players. So we need to decide exactly which monster, if any, we want to use to protect this room, and which traps, if any, we want to use to protect this room. Now remember, the yellow player has a little bit of advantage over the blue player and a lot of advantage, or a larger advantage, over the green player, because the yellow player knows what this card is and what this card is. The blue player knows what this card is, and the green player has no idea what any of these combat cards are, or exactly what they're going to do. So the yellow player does have that information to help them decide their strategy. And what they need to do is they need to destroy all these adventurers, because if even one of these adventurers survives through the entire first combat phase, and remember there are going to be 4 combat phases, if at least one of these adventurers survives, even if they only have 1 hit point left over, they're going to conquer this tile. It's going to be flipped over to its other side, and it's going to be worth negative victory points at the end of the game. So we want to stop these adventurers as quickly as we can by using all the resources we have at our disposal. We know that we have a pendulum, we know we have a trap door, and we know we have a rolling stone. Now these are great traps, but remember, in a corridor we can only use 1 monster and 1 trap, and we need to use them as efficiently as possible to take out these adventurers. So looking at what we have and seeing that we don't have to worry about any thieves making our life difficult and ruining the effectiveness of our traps, we pretty much have decided that the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to use the troll to defend our very first room. And we're going to spend 1 extra food when it comes to it, so we get him to the power of 4, so we know that he can defeat this warrior right here. So we know, just using the mental math, that we need to figure out a way to deal with this warrior and this priest really quick. And we have some traps we can use. We just need to figure out exactly how we want to use them. Now remember, we can only use 1 trap because we're defending a tunnel only, and our traps we have are the pendulum, which means the second adventurer is going to take 3 points of damage, killing the warrior. We got a trap door, which is going to do 2 points damage to the front guy and prevent the conquering phase, which we may want to use and pull back our troll. We may want to consider that pretty quickly. And then finally we have a rolling stone, which is going to do 3 points of damage to whoever the first adventurer is. Now the way combat works is the trap is going to go off, then our monster is going to get to attack. I should take that back. It's going to be trap, possible spell, monster is going to attack, possible spell, and if any monster is attacked, then any priests out there are going to do some healing. And then there's going to be fatigue, and if any adventurers survive, there's going to be a conquering of the tile. Now, having looked at that, and having looked at what traps we have, we're actually going to decide to not have our troll attack. We're going to play this a little bit smart. We're going to decide that the only thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be playing 1 trap, and that's a trap door. And then these other 2 traps are going to be put back on our trap pile. We're going to have potential ability to use them in later rounds. So our thought process is we're going to use this trap. And what this trap is the trap door. Says the first adventurer takes 2 points of damage, and we're going to skip this conquering step and the fatigue this round. That means these adventurers are not going to conquer this tile if I'm unable to defeat them all. So I'm just going to throw this out there first, do a little damage that can't be healed because my monster is not going to attack, and I'm not going to have to worry about this tile being conquered So the yellow player is actually pretty darn set for the very first round and is pretty happy with the results. So now we decide what we're going to do for the yellow player. We need to decide what we're going to do with the green player and the blue player, and I'll do that pretty quickly off camera. After all the players have done their planning, it's now time to reveal exactly which card or the spell is going to go off if there is enough power to power it. Luckily, it's not something we're going to have to worry about because none of our adventuring parties happen to have any wizards in them. So it's not going to be powerful enough to power the spell, but at least it's going to be powerful enough to do a little bit of fatigue damage if there's a conquering step for that player with that dungeon. Of course, if any of our players happen to have the paladin out against them, that would definitely be powerful enough to cast this detect evil spell. But again, nobody has any wizards, nobody has any paladins, so we're not going to have to worry about that at all. So we can go ahead and move to the resolution phase of the combat. We're going to go ahead and start with the yellow player first. So the first thing that's going to happen for the yellow player, the only thing they're doing is using a spell. They're not using any monsters, so we're going to go ahead and reveal that trap that they're using first. The first thing they're using is they're using a trapdoor trap that says the first adventurer takes 2 points of damage. We're going to put that 2 points of damage on top of the first adventurer. They have 4 hit points total, so they're not defeated yet. But the nice thing is that this card says that we're going to skip the conquering and the fatigue part of this round. Now that means that this card is not going to be doing 2 points of damage, but also means that we're not going to lose this tile to these adventurers, so we're kind of happy with that decision. Now normally after a trap goes off, you immediately discard it, but as a reminder so I don't forget about that, I'm just going to leave it out here so I don't forget that I'm actually skipping the fatigue and conquering step for the yellow player. We're now going to move on to the green player. They're going to go ahead and reveal their trap, and they're going to use the poison dart trap. It says do 1 point of damage to an adventurer of your choice, and that adventurer is going to take 2 points of damage later on after the conquering phase. So we need to decide which adventurer is going to take that damage. Don't really need to worry about it yet because the thieves are going to stop the damage, but I still need to choose my target. I'm going to choose, my target is going to be this first thief right here who's going to be hit by the dart, which would normally do 1 point of damage, but the thieves are going to prevent up to 2 points of damage, so the poison dart's not going to do any damage. And again, after the trap goes off, normally you discard it, but I'm going to leave this one out so I don't forget about the additional effect that's going to happen from this poison dart after the conquering phase. We're now going to move on to the blue player who's going to reveal their trap, and we're going to get the cursed ring. It says pay 1 gold, and the adventurers are going to fight over the ring. Each is going to take a point of damage, and then we're going to skip the conquering step. Now normally this would be 1 point of damage, 1 point of damage, 1 point of damage, but unfortunately the thieves are going to stop a total of 4 points of damage, which means there's not going to be any damage from the cursed ring, but the blue player doesn't have to worry about the conquering step, so they don't have to worry about losing this corridor. I'm going to leave this card out just like before so I don't forget to use it when we get to that part. Normally when you're doing the combat phase, you're supposed to do every complete dungeon before you move on to the next instead of going phase by phase like I'm going right now. The reason why I'm showing you phase by phase is so you can understand how the game works for each phase and kind of let you see how everything works so it doesn't add to confusion. Now, again, just re-emphasize, I should have showed you the complete yellow player going through the complete combat phase, then the green player through the complete combat phase, then the blue player. I just want to show you how this works for now, going phase by phase and action by action. So the next thing that would happen for all of our players is that a spell would go off. If it was a fast spell, and we see that's a slow spell, so we don't even have to worry about it. And additionally, nobody has any wizards, so the spell's not going to go off anyway, so we can skip that for all of our players. Next thing we're going to have is we're going to see if anybody has any monsters. The blue player has a monster. They have a vampire, and they have one option, or two options. They attack the front guy for 3 points of damage, or any guy for 3 points of damage. Then he's going to be removed from the combat for the rest of the combat phases. Or I can choose to only do 2 points of damage, which means that he's going to stay face up and I can keep using him on future rounds. That's actually what we're going to do. We're going to decide to do 2 points of damage only, and he's going to come back face up and we can use him again, and we're going to do 2 points of damage to one of these people. And the person we're going to choose is we're going to choose the middle thief, who's going to take 2 points of damage, and that's going to end the monster attack for a blue player. Now we'd see if there was a slow spell up, and yes, there would be a slow spell up here, and the slow spell normally would go off if any of our players happen to have any spellcasters attacking them, but luckily none of our players do, so we don't have to worry about that. We can skip that and go on directly to the healing phase. Now, if any of these adventuring parties have a priest and a monster attack that adventuring party this turn, that priest is going to heal based on however many hearts they have. So that means if this witch attacked, this priest would heal for 1. If this troll attacked, this priest right here would heal for 1. Now, since no monsters attacked, the priests aren't going to heal. And if we come over here, we see there's no priests at all, so there's not going to be any healing on the blue player's board at all. So now we move on to the final spot, which is going to be the fatigue and the conquering phase for all of our players. And now we come to the final part of the first round of combat, where we have the conquering and the fatigue step. Now the yellow player played a card that says that the conquering and the fatigue step is not going to happen for them, so we're going to skip that for them. We'll discard the trap card now that we remember what we need to do. This poison dart trap is going to go, let me back up here, and this is going to finish round 1 of the combat for a yellow player. They're done with round number 1. We're now going to move over to the green player, who's going to have their poison dart trap go off, which is going to do 2 points of damage. And the poison dart trap just does say that thieves cannot stop this damage. And this 2 points of damage is going to happen to this thief right here. Of course, this damage is going to happen after the fatigue and the conquering step, so I'm just putting this here so I don't forget it. And now we're going to go ahead and look at the fatigue. So this card says that we're going to deal 2 fatigue to the front adventurer. The priest is going to take 2 points of damage, and then they're going to go ahead and conquer this tunnel on us. And remember, anytime one of our dungeon tiles gets conquered, we're going to go down 1 level on the evil meter. So green is going to go down 1 level on the evil meter, putting them back exactly where they started at the start of the game. And then at this point, the poison dart would go off, doing 2 points of damage to our thief. And that's going to end the first round of combat for our green player. I can go ahead and discard this card. I don't need to worry about it anymore. And then finally, we're going to move on to our blue player. Now remember, they played the curse ring that says we're going to skip the conquering step and the fatigue this round. So that's not going to happen for this player. We can go ahead and get rid of this trap. We don't need to worry about it. But we have stopped this adventurer from conquering this dungeon tile for us. And that's going to end the first combat round for all 3 of our players. And now we need to plan what we're going to do for the second combat round for all of our players. Hello everybody, before we continue, I just want to do a little preface and a very big apology. Apparently, when I was recording this video, I wasn't smart enough to replace the batteries in my wireless mic. So right about here in the prior videos where my wireless mic cut out, and I shot the best video in the world. It was so great that Peter Jackson wrote me a letter and said, hey, we want you to do our next Hobbit film. Okay, I may have made part of that up, but I still look like a fool because I made the biggest mistake and forgot to check my batteries. So unfortunately, you're going to see a very odd edit in here. But I do have everything set up exactly, I hope, the way it was when the audio went out on the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the combat phase. Hopefully everything is still right and I got everything set up correctly. If not, please leave the comments, and also make sure you leave a little bit of a ribbing comment harassing me for being foolish enough to not check the batteries in my video recording device. Although on a really positive note, I do know how all these boards are going to play out because, you know what, I've already done it already. Back on a serious note, we're on round 2 of the combat phase, and we need to start with our yellow player. The yellow player needs to decide exactly what they're going to do. Again, we're in the planning phase. That means all the players need to decide which monsters, which traps, and exactly where the combat is going to occur on this combat round. So starting with the yellow player, since they didn't actually lose a dungeon tile on the prior combat round, thanks to the very clever playing of that card, that trap card that prevented from the conquering the fatigue step, we're still actually on the first conquering room for them. And now all they need to decide is exactly what trap they're going to play. And miraculously, I already know what trap they're going to play. Maybe I'm a little psychic, or maybe I'm still harassing myself for not checking those batteries. Anyways, back on a serious note, I'm going to play this trap, and I'm also going to play this monster as the yellow player. The green player is also going to play 1 trap, and they're also going to play 1 monster, the witch, because that's the only monster they have. And I should preface and let you know that this combat round is happening on the second dungeon tile right here. Now we finally move over to the blue player, who, if you remember correctly on the prior combat round, they played a card of the cursed ring, which prevented this tile from being conquered, so it's still the tile that the adventurers are working towards. So now the blue player needs to decide what they're going to do, and they're going to play this trap, and they're also going to play this monster. Now that all of our players have decided exactly what they're doing and where the combats are going to occur on this combat round, we can go ahead and reveal exactly what the spell is that's going to activate this round. Now remember, fortunately, since none of our adventuring parties have any wizards, we don't need to worry about the spell step, even though the spell that popped up is a pretty cool slow spell they call Graffiti, which can mess around with the players. Fortunately, we don't have any wizards, we don't have any nasty paladins, so we definitely don't need to worry about it at all. But the important thing is to look at this, notice that it's going to cause 2 points of fatigue damage once we get to that phase of the second combat round. So now that we've revealed our spell, we can go ahead and just reveal exactly what's going to happen to our dungeon lords during this second combat round. And of course, we're going to do this properly, where we're going to start with each Dungeon Lord. Each Dungeon Lord is going to do their complete combat round before we move on to the next Dungeon Lord. And that is actually how you play Dungeon Lords when you play the game. So starting with the yellow player, because he's my favorite person to start with, at least for this sample gameplay, we're going to go ahead and do the first step. Remember, the first step is revealing our trap. The trap we're going to reveal is called the pendulum. Now, the pendulum is probably a good relation to Edgar Allan Poe, or maybe some really good literature. But in this case, what the pendulum is going to do is it's going to do 3 points of damage to whichever adventurer is in the middle row of the adventuring party. 3 points of damage is very good damage. It also happens to be enough to take out this warrior who only has 3 hit points, and it's even better because we don't have any thieves to worry about who can cancel any of the trap damage, so this trap is going to go off. It is going to do its full damage. And after I'm done being slightly klutzy, just a little bit here, I'll fix that, and then we're going to go ahead and do the 3 points of damage to this warrior, who's going to be sent to our prison away from his fellow adventuring parties, who are now one step closer to being stopped from destroying my wonderful Dungeon Lord's dungeon. Now, of course, after the trap goes off, the next thing we need to worry about is the spell. Again, no wizards, so not a problem, nothing we need to worry about. So we're going to go move on directly to our monster attacking. Now, the wonderful thing about the troll is he does 3 basic points of damage. If I feed him 1 food, he's going to do 4 points of damage, but unfortunately, the troll is only able to attack the lead adventurer. And since the lead adventurer only has 2 hit points left, it'd be pretty silly of me to pay that extra food since damage from monsters doesn't carry over. So we're just going to have the troll do his basic 3 points of damage, which 3 plus 2 is definitely 5, which is more than enough to defeat this poor hapless adventurer who we're going to lock in our jail cell until he's learned his lesson about not interrupting our Dungeon Lord business. Sadly though, after the combat, trolls, like most monsters who don't have the magical return silver arrow on them, such as the vampire with a special ability, once they attack, they cry medic, run home to the dungeon lair, and they're no longer able to attack for the rest of that year's combat round. Of course, they do go face down, which means starting very next year, at the very beginning of the next year, they're going to be face up and usable for the next combat year, and also for the entire next year with the seasons. But in the game rules, once a monster has attacked, unless they have the special abilities such as a vampire does with the silver return arrow, once the monster does his attack, he does 1 attack only, and that's all he's ever going to do for that entire combat. So you got to make sure you plan when you're using these monsters. Troll has done his attack. He's now face down. He was actually very helpful though. He did take out a warrior, and all we are left with is 1 priest. But unfortunately, we don't have any more traps, and we don't have any monsters, and we have a priest who is still powerful enough to conquer this dungeon tile. Of course, in our favor though, through clever card play, traps, and monsters, the priest doesn't have anybody to heal, so while he is all alone and still can conquer the tiles, he's not going to bring anybody back from the dead. So we're going to bypass the healing phase, move directly onto the fatigue phase, and we're going to look at the card and see that he is going to take 2 points of fatigue damage. Unfortunately for us, it's not enough to defeat him, so the priest is going to successfully conquer this dungeon tile, this corridor, so we have lost 1 room, which is going to affect us in the final scoring at the end of the game. Fortunately for us though, we're pretty sure we can defeat him next round if it comes down to it, and an even extra nicer bonus is the fact that we can probably do it without having to even spend this trap, because this poor hapless priest only has 1 hit point left. That's going to end the second combat round for our yellow player. We're going to move on to a green player and see exactly how they're going to handle the combat in this second dungeon tile that hopefully they avoid losing. The first thing the green player is going to do on their second combat round is they're going to reveal their trap, which is a firewall. Firewall is a very powerful trap. It's actually very, very nice. It's going to do 1 point of damage to every adventurer, and the adventurer who's last in line is actually going to take 2 points of damage, which could be really cool because that would actually take out this thief right here. Here's the unfortunate thing for us though. The unfortunate thing here is that the 2 thieves are going to prevent 2 points of damage from this trap, so they're going to block the first point of damage. They're going to block the second point of damage, but at least the final 2 points of damage are going to get through. And now that I'm looking at the green player's board, I'm realizing I don't think I put the damage tokens from the fatigue on the priest from the first combat round. I'm hoping I'm right. I can't go back on the video to double check it right now. So I'm just going to add 2 points of damage, assuming I was supposed to do that on the prior combat round for the Detect Evil when they did the exploration and they conquered and did the fatigue from the prior round. Hopefully from the second combat round I'm correct there. If not, again, make sure you make a lot of fun of me for forgetting to change those batteries in my camcorder. After the trap goes off, the trap is going to be discarded after doing its little bit of wicked damage. It did a little bit of damage for us, so we're pretty happy about that. Now the witch is going to go ahead and attack, and here we have two options. One, we can have the witch do 4 points damage to the priest, which would take the priest out, but unfortunately we only have one, or actually we have two traps left, and if we did that, none of these remaining traps would be effective at all, and you'll understand why when these traps actually come into play. So what we're going to do is we're going to decide to do 1 point of damage twice with the witch, which is going to do 1 point of damage to two different targets. We're going to go ahead and choose the middle thief as our first target, which is going to give him a 3rd point of damage, which will actually defeat him and send him directly to our dungeon, which is a good thing for us. And then the 2nd point of damage is going to go directly to this thief. And now we have two party members who are damaged. The witch has done her damage, and since she doesn't have the magical silver return ability, she's going to return face down, and we can't use her anymore for any more of the remaining combat rounds. And now we're done with the monster combat. We're going to move on to the spell, which isn't going to happen. So we're going to move on to the priest healing. And the priest is indeed going to heal because we did attack with a monster. So he's going to heal 1 point of damage, leaving him with 3 hit points down. This thief right here only has 1 hit point left. We're now going to come to the part of the phase where we do the fatigue and then the combat resolution for this last remaining tile. So we're going to go ahead and do 2 points of fatigue damage to the front priest, which is going to leave him with 1 hit point left over. It's going to leave this rogue with also 1 hit point left over, and unfortunately for the green player, one more tile is going to be conquered. We're done with the green player's second combat round. We're now going to move to the blue player's second combat round. Second combat round for the blue player is going to be pretty darn quick. He's basically going to do exactly what he did the last combat round. He's going to go ahead and play the curse ring, which says pay 1 gold, which we can easily do, which is going to do damage to our party, but unfortunately the rogues are going to negate all the damage. But at least we still get the benefit of the fact that there's not going to be a conquering, and there's not going to be a fatigue step this round, but there will be an attack phase this round. And this vampire is going to go ahead and they're going to attack. They're going to take their silver special ability, which is going to allow them to do 2 points of damage and return face up, so we can use them on the next combat round. They're going to do that 2 points of damage to the middle thief. That's going to be enough to defeat him, sending him to the dungeon. We've now defeated one adventurer. One adventurer is left. They're not going to do any healing because they don't have any priest, and they're not going to do any fatigue, but they're also not going to do any conquering, so we're happy with those results as the blue player. We're now moved to the part where we need to plan the next battle phase, the next battle round. We need to figure out exactly what we're going to do to protect our dungeons from these interloping adventurers. We're going to start with the yellow player. We need to decide exactly which dungeon tile is going to be the one possibly conquered if we don't stop this lone priest here. The green player sees that they need to protect this room, and they're very worried about losing this room because they need to take out 2 monsters, or 2 adventurers, and all we have are 2 traps. And we know exactly what those traps are, so things are not looking very promising for us. And then finally, the blue player again is going to be trying to protect this main entrance tile because none of their tiles have been conquered, so they're pretty happy with that. So now they need to decide exactly what they're going to do to defend their dungeons. Well, starting with the blue player, he's pretty easy. We know what we're going to do with him. He's going to go ahead and use his vampire to protect his dungeon. The yellow player isn't going to do a thing because this priest only has 1 point of damage. And playing the odds, we're pretty sure that this tile, or this card, is going to do at least 1 point of damage. And then finally, we're going to come to the green player, who is stuck with a very tough and very bad decision. Unfortunately for the green player, they only have 2 traps left, and it's the exact same trap as the poison meal trap, which says for 1 food if they discard it, since we're still in the first year, they can do an amount of damage to whichever adventurer we want based on however many hit points they have left over. Here's the unfortunate thing. Both of our adventurers only have 1 hit point left, so each one of these traps is only going to do 1 point of damage, and the thief, with their ability to counteract 1 point of damage from our traps, will stop any damage I can do with these traps. So not only would I be wasting 1 food to power one of these traps, I'd also be wasting 1 gold because we're powering a trap inside a room. Now remember, anytime we lay a trap in a room, it's going to cost us 1 gold on top of any costs associated with that trap. So we can basically waste a whole bunch of resources and lose a room, or we can save all these resources and still lose the room. Really tough decision. I think we're going to save those resources and still lose that room. Now that all of our dungeon lords have made their decisions on exactly what they're going to do to try to protect their dungeons this round, we're going to move on to the point where we're going to reveal the 3rd combat card. And again, since there's no wizards, we don't need to worry about the spell part of it. We just need to worry about the fatigue portion of this card, and now we move on to the resolution of the combat. Yellow player played extremely conservatively, didn't waste their trap, didn't have any monsters, so we're going to bypass these two phases, don't have to worry about any spells. The priest can't heal because none of our monsters attacked, so the next thing that's going to happen is the priest, who happens to be the only adventurer left standing, is going to take 2 points of fatigue damage, which is more than enough to defeat this priest. He only has 3 hit points. Brings him to a total of 4 points of damage. He's defeated, so without lifting a finger, without spending any resources, we got to sit back, smile, and laugh as we defeat the last adventurer, protecting our dungeon, and we get to sit fat and happy because this entire combat year, the only thing we lost was one small corridor. And trust me when I say in Dungeon Lords, when you're first learning how to play the game, if you spend a combat year and you only lose one corridor, give yourself a high five, give yourself a pat on the back, and then gloat to all your friends because you have done a fantastic job playing Dungeon Lords. Let's move on to our green player who gets to suffer a little bit of suffering, which is what you may think, but luckily this card is actually going to save our green player who was sweating bullets a moment ago, but not anymore. Sometimes luck can favor the bold, and sometimes luck can just favor those who are out of luck, and in this case, green definitely got favored by luck. We're going to skip the traps because we don't have any, no spells to worry about, no monsters, no healing is going to happen because no monster attacks, so we're going to move directly on to the fatigue step. Now remember, when fatigue, if it does kill an adventurer, any remaining fatigue damage is going to carry over, and we happen to have 2 points of fatigue damage we need to allocate because we see that from the Word of Peace card. So the first point of fatigue damage is going to be enough to defeat the priest. He's going to be sent off to the dungeon where he'll be manacled for causing such terrible problems for our dungeon lord. And then the second adventurer, the one who's left over, who also only has 1 hit point left, is going to take that 1 remaining point of fatigue damage. He will also be defeated, who will also be sent off to our dungeon where he'll also be attached to the rack with the priest because we're angry that we lost 2 dungeon tiles to this adventuring party. Green has managed to get very lucky, save their dungeon, save this room, which is very, very nice for them, and we're going to move on to the blue player, and hopefully none of you will realize that I just noticed I've been cheating, but let's pretend none of that ever happened. I just noticed I made one small mistake. This room, and again, I'm going off of memory here, and I apologize, this room actually should have been right up here, and that would have been a legal placement for this room. There is a room that does match that allows you to be on the lower half, and let's just, for the sake of saving my sanity, let's just pretend that I actually had that room and it was legally placed there. It doesn't change anything. You actually see how Dungeon Lords is played. Just want to let you know that I just caught my own personal error, and again, I apologize about that, but I don't think it's going to affect anything. You're still seeing how Dungeon Lords is played. Finally, we move on to the blue player who needs to take a little bit of a gamble, and they're trying to gamble in a way that we know for a fact we're going to lose this corridor room because there's no way we can defeat both those adventurers. We just need to figure out there's a way that we can do damage properly, which will guarantee we can defeat both those adventurers by the end of the 4th combat round, but then we're gambling on exactly how much fatigue damage is attached to that card. If this card happens to be a 2 fatigue damage, we can do this in such a way that we can defeat both of these adventurers possibly by the end of the next round, unless math is failing me. But again, it's a little bit of a gamble, and I don't know exactly what we want to do here, so we need to think and plan extremely carefully. First, we can either do 3 points of damage to the front warrior, plus these 2 points of damage will be a total enough to defeat him, but then my vampire doesn't get to attack the second round, because if he does 3 points of damage, he doesn't get a special silver return ability. Or what I can do is decide to do the 2 points of damage to one of these guys, do some fatigue damage, and then hope I'm going to do some more fatigue damage on the next round, and it's enough fatigue damage to take out both these guys. We're going to go ahead and gamble and hope that we get enough fatigue damage out of that card, and we're going to decide to do the 2 points of damage ability, which is going to allow us to return, and we're going to choose to do 2 points of damage to the thief, and hopefully we played properly and gambled properly. So after we've done the attack with the vampire, we're going to move on to spells, nothing. We're going to move on to healing, which is going to be nothing. We're going to move on to the fatigue, which again is going to be 2 points of fatigue damage to the lead adventurer. And then we're going to move on to the conquering, and this dungeon tile will be conquered. The blue player isn't too worried about this. He's actually managed to survive multiple combat rounds without losing a single dungeon tile. So losing one now is not that big a deal. And again, we're doing a little bit of gambling and hoping we're going to get some adventurers thrown in our dungeon for their terrible interloping in our wonderful dungeon ecosystem. That's going to end the third combat round for all of our dungeon lords. We're going to move on to the final fourth combat round where we need to plan exactly what's going to happen for our blue player, not for a yellow or a green player, because both of them have saved both of their dungeons from these interloping adventurers. The blue player now needs to decide exactly what they're going to do for the battle planning phase. First thing they need to do is decide exactly which room they're going to be protecting. They're really not too concerned for right now, so we're going to go ahead and choose this room just because we like it and we're hoping to build our dungeon out this direction later rounds, hopefully, or whatever our strategy might be. After we chose our dungeon, we're going to decide how we're going to protect. Well, we only have one choice here at all. Now that we've decided what we're going to do for our protection, we're going to go ahead and reveal what the combat card is. And looks like we gambled, and we gambled wrong. It's now time for the resolution of the final combat phase, so we need to move to the resolution and figure out exactly what's going to happen. And it's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point. We can either take out the rogue, or we can take out the warrior. Either way, one of them is going to be able to escape. We're not going to be able to do enough damage to take both of them out and save this dungeon tile, but at least we can add one of them to our dungeon to score some victory points at the end of the game. So just to be mean and say that we did it with the vampire and that he did enough damage, we're going to go ahead and decide to do the full 3 points of damage, which means he now flips over. And we're going to do the full 3 points damage to the warrior. Since he only had 3 hit points left, that's going to be enough to defeat him. He will be sent to our dungeon. Unfortunately, that does mean that we have no more spells, no more healing. There's only going to be 1 point of fatigue awarded to the thief at the end. It's going to leave him with 1 hit point left over. Definitely enough for him to still be able to conquer. He's going to conquer this final dungeon tile. But luckily, this is the 4th combat round. There won't be any more combat after this. So after this defeat of our 2nd dungeon tile, he's going to wander off to greener pastures or wherever adventurers go after they've conquered dungeons. After the 4th combat round, you simply flip over the scoreboard and you start all over again with the 4 seasons. Go through the 2nd year, go through your 2nd combat round, and that's basically Dungeon Lords, the board game. There's only one thing I didn't show you during the combat, and that's simply because I didn't have enough room on my camera. But don't forget that every time you lose one of these dungeon tiles, whether it's a corridor or a room, every time you lose one, your evil meter does go down 1 point. So the yellow player would have lost 1 point on the evil meter, green would have lost 2, and blue also would have lost 2 points on the evil meter. Once you're done with the 2nd year, you're simply going to pull out the scoring cards, and everybody's going to score points depending on who has the highest amount in the titles. And then you're going to score victory points based on however many rooms you have left over, what kind of monsters you have in your dungeon, and various other things like that. You're going to add up all the scores. Whoever has the most victory points is the winner of Dungeon Lords. But trust me when I say the first couple of times you play Dungeon Lords, if you happen to score anything above 0, consider yourself a winner. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial video for Dungeon Lords. Stay tuned for my final review of Dungeon Lords, the board game, coming up soon. If you have any comments or questions, please be sure to leave them in the YouTube comments down below. If you want to know what's coming up next on the channel, check out my big thank you video where I show you exactly which games I'm going to start reviewing in the future. It's not going to be 100% set in stone. It just gives you a rough idea of what I'm working in there. I'm going to do a couple games by Vlaada Chvatil, which you're seeing Dungeon Lords. I'm also going to get Mage Knight, including Mage Knight solo play, because I've gotten a lot of requests for that. Also look for Through the Ages, and again, if you want to see what else is coming down the pike, make sure you check out that thank you video. Again, this has been another off-the-shelf board game review looking at Dungeon Lords. Thanks for watching.